He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Where should you put an emergency fund? Can you get in trouble for paying a tradesperson cash? Are rewards points worth it? These are some of the questions we're tackling on No Stupid Questions this week. I'm Susan Edmunds, RNZ's money correspondent, and this is our last episode for the year. But please keep sending your questions to me over the break at questions@rnz.co.nz. I'm joined by Justin Gregory, who may or may not have his Santa hat on, but is ready to wrangle your questions.
I'm here. I'm not wearing a Santa hat, but I'm very much in the festive mood. So Merry Christmas, everybody. Thanks for a good year.
Has been a good year.
All right, our first question is from Lee, who has a problem, but it's the kind of problem you really want to have. I'm in my early 60s, says Lee, and have never had an emergency fund before. I can relate to that, says Justin. I'm now in a situation to be able to do so. Nice one, Lee. I have about $130,000, says Lee, not me, in my KiwiSaver, and I have it in a high-growth fund. I work part-time and will probably continue to do so after I hit retirement age, so I feel confident leaving my KiwiSaver in a high-risk fund. I may change the balance after I retire to put some into a conservative fund. But I've now inherited $20,000 that I feel should be put away in an emergency fund. I'm thinking of finding the best rate for an on-call or savings account to put $10,000 in, but the other $10,000 I'm not sure about. Should I just put it into a term deposit or a notice saver account, or would it be better invested in a managed fund? How quick is it to liquidise a managed fund? And do you have any other suggestions for the extra $10,000?
Yes, a great problem to have. You're right that it's probably a good idea to have that $20,000 in an emergency fund that you can access whenever you need to. And it makes sense that that's in a low-risk investment that won't be swinging around in value at just the time you want to access it.
And what else does Lee need to consider here?
Well, Dean Anderson at Kernel says he would start by looking at Lee's broader financial situation. Do you have debt, a mortgage, or have dependents? And he says things like that can affect the size and the structure of your emergency savings. If you have more commitments, you generally need a bigger emergency fund. Dean says in an environment of low savings rates, as I guess we have at the moment, you might consider diversifying your emergency fund across a few products to enhance your returns without sacrificing your liquidity.
And what's liquidity again?
That's just your ability to get your money out when you need it.
Yeah, I do that.
He says term deposits are familiar, but their long lock-in periods and potential penalties for early withdrawal can make them less ideal for funds that might be needed at short notice, because if you have it locked up for a year, it's not easy to get it out. But cash plus managed funds can be an alternative, he says, to traditional term deposits or flexible savings accounts. They're structured as a diversified fund. They invest in cash and cash equivalents like bonds and short-term deposits. And while their value can fluctuate slightly, they do aim to provide a yield that is competitive with or better than traditional savings and term deposits while still being liquid. So at Kernel, an investor selling units in a cash plus fund would usually have the money in their bank account within 2 business days. So that's not too bad.
That's nice. Yeah, good one.
Yeah, so for those with a slightly higher risk tolerance and a longer time horizon for their emergency savings, a defensive fund could be an option. They typically hold a higher proportion of income-generating assets and have potential for greater returns than pure cash while still prioritising capital preservation.
I feel like we're forgetting something here, though.
Yes, Dean says people often forget about the tax implications of their decisions.
Yeah, that'd be it.
So if you're on a higher income tax rate, you could benefit from the fact that investments that are structured as portfolio investment entities, PIs, but not to be confused with PI funds, the KiwiSaver manager, they have a top tax rate on earnings of 28%.
Our next question is about interest rates. Susan, you've written quite a bit about interest rates over the past week or so. Why is that then?
I have, because even though the official cash rate has come down, some banks have started putting their fixed home loan rates up already because wholesale markets have decided that it's time to think about when the OCR is going to rise again.
Oh my God.
I know, it never stops. And with this stuff, it's almost more important what the markets think is going to happen than what is actually happening, because they drive a lot of the prices we pay, which I think is what we're about to get into.
Right, yes. This question is from John, who wants to know, what happens to the money extracted from every mortgagee's pocket whenever the Reserve Bank increases the official cash rate, or OCR? John says, I anticipate that we all understand that the bank which holds our mortgage then may increase the interest rate we are required to pay upon our mortgage. I anticipate we all also understand we then have to pay more by way of interest to the bank which holds our mortgage. I think I follow that. Yep, cool. All right, move on. I anticipate we may also understand our bank, says John, has to pay more to the Reserve Bank on any money it has to borrow from it. But I anticipate our bank, in parentheses, has not had to borrow all the money to fund our mortgage from the Reserve Bank. So, what happens to the extra money we have to pay to our bank? Does it go to our bank? Does it somehow go to the Reserve Bank? If it goes to the Reserve Bank, does it then go to our government? Where does it go? Where does the money go, Susan? Where does the money go?
Yes. So John is right that banks don't get all their money that they lend us from the Reserve Bank. In fact, they actually don't get much of it from there. They get most of the money that you borrow when you take a home loan from other people and businesses, so people with term deposits, savings, that sort of thing, and wholesale markets, which are pricing in things like their expectation for central bank rates here and in other countries. To talk through this one, I went to David Cunningham. He's Chief Executive of Squirrel, which is the mortgage broking firm, but he also used to be Chief Executive of the Cooperative Bank.
None of the money really comes from the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank sets an official cash rate, but that's a reference point for other interest rates, really, as opposed to like banks have a lot more money invested with the Reserve Bank than they borrow. Effectively, they're net investors with the Reserve Bank, as opposed to borrowers. And so they hold liquid assets with the Reserve Bank. So the Reserve Bank generally provides no funding other than sort of providing liquidity support in the sense of, it's like a check account that we all have. Yeah, generally what happens when the OCR increases, then you'd see that ripple through to increases in savings accounts, increasing in term deposit interest rates. It takes a while for the transmission to occur, but when the OCR is going up, savers would get more, and when the OCR is going down, savers would get less.
He says the margin banks make on lending tends to get bigger when interest rates fall. He says it's increased since pre-COVID days, but that's probably because the Reserve Bank is requiring banks to hold more capital now against the loans that they make.
Our next question is from Roberto, who wants to know from which funds are KiwiSaver hardship withdrawals disproportionately coming? Oh, that's quite an interesting question. Now, does he mean growth conservative funds or does he mean the providers, Susan?
I think he means funds.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm here to ask the stupid question, so job done. Roberto asks, how does that impact remaining fund members? Oh, yeah, good question. So are the funds selling off their more valuable assets to pay for withdrawals? Because that's happened, hasn't it?
KiwiSaver providers tell me there's no real pattern as to where withdrawals are coming from. They're coming from all sorts of funds, mostly just reflecting the mix of investments that members have. So, for example, at Pi Funds, they say it's mostly growth funds, but that reflects where their investors are. And I think that makes sense because people probably hadn't planned to make those withdrawals.
Yeah, true.
They say hardship withdrawals are managed like any other withdrawal and don't have a material impact on other fund members. They don't have to sell long-term or high-quality assets to fund them.
I'm kind of surprised by that. So the impact really is only on your fund and it doesn't affect anybody else's?
Yeah, that's what they're telling me.
Really good question, Roberto. Thanks for that. Okay, now Andrew and Nina have a question about credit card rewards. Again, something you wrote about last week, Susan, about credit card companies becoming less generous in their treatment of customers.
Yes, we've seen BNZ preparing to cut what it gives cardholders in rewards. That's happening because there are now new limits on interchange fees, which are used to fund most rewards schemes.
And what are interchange fees?
That's the fee that's paid by the bank that receives a payment to the bank that provides the credit card that's been used.
Cool, gotcha.
So the first part of that crackdown happened a couple of years ago and we saw a pullback on rewards then. So that this is the next step of that process, I guess.
All right, so then Andrew and Nina want to know specifically if you're paying a transaction fee, does that fee cost more than the hot points you earn if you pay off the card every month?
Yeah.
Knew it. I knew it.
Yeah. If you're paying a surcharge on every transaction, then you probably are worse off. Though I note Consumer said today that we shouldn't be paying anything more than 1.2% or 1.3% in surcharge now. But according to investment advisor Jeremy Sullivan, the rate of reward you get from credit cards at the moment ranges from anything from 0.5% of your spending to 1.43% on an American Express AirPoints Platinum card. But you might find that you have quite a few transactions that don't have a surcharge attached at all. The supermarket, for example, doesn't usually charge when you use a credit card in my experience. And new rules are still intended to take effect that would rule them out on in-store payments by May.
Our last question for this episode, and the last question for the year, is from Deborah, who wants to know, if a tradie asks her to pay cash for a job, will Deborah get in trouble if the IRD comes knocking?
I started off with this by talking to my husband, who's actually an accountant. He says, in general, it's the tradie who's going to be in the gun if the IRD starts looking into what they've been up to. It's on them to make sure they're meeting their tax obligations rather than the responsibility of the household getting them to do the work.
Yeah, and IRD are paying more attention to cashies now, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They're paying more attention to everything. But IRD has been looking at cash jobs and various sectors that are prone to them over the past few years. And it has some pretty good systems to identify people who might not be meeting their obligations. So this is definitely a riskier request from a tradie than it might have been 10 years ago, and not something people should be doing. But then I left him alone to put up the Christmas lights, and I rang Robyn Walker at Deloitte. She says while it's correct that the risk of an individual being prosecuted for taking part in a cash job is very low, the law technically makes it possible if you're sort of complicit.
But there's a but here, isn't there? But?
Well, she says people should also consider that it wouldn't happen if there wasn't demand for it. And more broadly, if some people aren't paying their share of tax, then other people are having to pick up more. It might also make it harder for businesses operating legitimately because people will get used to the lower prices of the tax dodgers. And if you're found to be evading tax, so if you are the tradesperson taking the cash, the penalty is 150% of the tax shortfall, and then there can be criminal penalties too.
So don't do it, huh?
That's right. IRD can track things like the amount of building products purchased and then the amount of income made to see whether it's likely someone has been doing more work than they're declaring, that sort of thing.
Audience question time. Last week we asked you, when the student loan scheme was set up in 1992, what was the rate of interest being charged?
The answer is 8.2%, which is actually higher than I thought it might have been. At the moment, the rate that's charged for people who are overseas, because it's only interest-free when you're in New Zealand, is 4.9%.
How long do you have to be overseas before that interest kicks in?
Up to 183 consecutive days, which is about 6 months.
Right, and there are late payment interest rates too.
Yes, 8.9% is the late payment.
And that's more.
Yes, it adds up fast, and we've seen IRD cracking down on this, in some cases even arresting people at the border.
So, folks, check in, get a repayment plan going with IRD before you leave the country. And now onto a happier thing, a question for this week, and you'll get a few weeks to answer it because we're not going to be back until January the 28th in 2026. So the question is, what sort of increase in spending is normal at Christmas? And in my house, the answer is a lot.
Yes, this is a busy time for shops around the country, which is probably welcome after another pretty tough year. I know I said it's been a good year, but that's easy for me to say on this side. But we want to know how big a bump in spending you think they get. Send your answers as well as any questions that occur to you over the next few weeks to questions@rnz.co.nz. No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmunds was written and presented by Susan Edmunds. That's me. Justin Gregory is the producer. Thanks to Lee, John, Roberto, Andrew, Nina and Deborah for their questions, and Dean Anderson, David Cunningham, Jeremy Sullivan and Robyn Walker for their answers. Follow and listen to No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmunds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or any podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Bye for now.
Merry Christmas.